this year and every year that I'm in office, not just because I love jazz, and I do, but because I also know that it's important to our city, to our collective identity as Americans. Philadelphia's jazz scene at the beginning of the 20th century developed like almost every other city scene, in the predominantly African-American neighborhoods and clubs. In Philly, of course, that meant places along Columbia Avenue in North Philadelphia, since renamed for the great Cecil B. Moore, and clubs like the Clef Club of Jazz and Performing Arts and PEPS in South Philadelphia. In 1970, Philadelphia became the home of Sun Ra's band, and then helped lay the groundwork for the 80s and 90s and into the new millennium. Today, Philadelphia does still have places where you can hear great jazz. Downtown at Chris's Jazz Cafe, which features nightly shows, or in West Oak Lane up in Relish. But unfortunately, we actually do have fewer than we used to. We need to work to rebuild appreciation of jazz and promote innovative presentations of jazz music to build the audiences in our clubs in order for them to survive. We have a thriving jazz radio station, WRTI, sponsored by Temple University. Its hosts, of course, have been such notables as Bob Perkins, the BP with the GM on RTI, and the late, great Harrison Ridley, Jr. Philadelphia has taken steps, though, in the last few years to promote our heritage and preserve this art form for future generations. In 2010, the Philadelphia Jazz Coalition was formed to help promote Philadelphia's celebration of Jazz Month in 2011. The coalition came together as an organization dedicated to the future of jazz in our city. The members of the coalition are caring, dedicated professionals hoping to address the issues faced by jazz artists and producers across the board. Issues like too few employment opportunities, low compensation for the opportunities that do exist, sometimes a lack of unity and cooperation among club owners and the musical community, and dwindling funding for music education programs. And like the jazz community at large, this coalition can come together to address these issues for the benefit of the future of jazz. Just like in the early days of the genre, jazz has the ability to bring us together and cause controversy at the same time. In the 1920s, jazz drew patrons, black and white, to then illegal speakeasies and clubs in many of our urban neighborhoods. At one time, jazz was considered by some to represent a threat to the moral order of America, according to some commentators. I've read this 5 times, I have to laugh every time. Today it's revered as a uniquely American art form and appreciated around the world. It's studied in universities and heard in concert halls once reserved for European classical music. Let us reflect upon the remarkable transformation to guide us, that remarkable transformation to guide us in dealing with the challenges we face in preserving jazz in the modern world. Ever evolving, jazz continues to transform itself as new musicians experiment with the sounds themselves to express how they tell their unique stories. From stride and swing to bebop and cool jazz, the music has certainly evolved. In the new millennium, jazz musicians have more options and more influences than ever before. They are compelled to wrestle with new questions about musical crossover and integration, and of course, the ever-present discussions about the purity of the music. But just as it always has, jazz will continue to reflect the moods and diversity of our nation, a melting pot genre for a melting pot society. It has stood the test of time because it has been open and accessible to everyone. And regardless of where we fall on the spectrum, I think we can all agree that the biggest challenge that jazz music faces is remaining relevant and remaining alive. In an economy where music programs are cut in our schools and the popular music on the radio changes almost every day, jazz education is worth investing in. And let me be very clear, and I've said this in Philadelphia, so it won't be new. Music and art must become standard parts of the curriculum in our schools, just like English, math, and science. Jazz music won't endure unless young people pick up that torch. And it's our responsibility to teach them and encourage them to love it. And we have a number of institutions in Philadelphia that offer jazz programs to many, many students. The Kimmel Center's Youth Jazz Ensemble, Temple University's Border School of Music Jazz Studies program, Settlement Music School offers jazz classes, the University of the Arts School of Music, the Maplewood Music Studio in Germantown, and of course, again, the Clef Club's Jazz Education Program, and there are many others. In addition to these more private institutions, the School District of Philadelphia is working hard to give every one of our students not only a quality, full-rounded education, but one that also includes music instruction and its appreciation in these very difficult and challenging economic times. With the Monk Institute. And one of those Institute members, Philadelphia's own Christian McBride, was given a great surprise when he was reunited with one of his childhood instrumental music teachers who was listening in the audience. This teacher, Margie Keefe, is still teaching and mentoring students in our city after more than 35 years of service. And the reality is that it's teachers like Margie and many, many others that helped make Philadelphia's jazz scene the great place that it is. Almost all of the musicians I mentioned who claim Philadelphia as their hometown studied music in our schools. And working with the school district and our new superintendent, Dr. Heider, I'll certainly do all that I can to protect these vital programs. In closing, I'd like to share an excerpt of a poem. It's called The Trumpet Player, 52nd Street, by Langston Hughes, a graduate of Lincoln University in Chester County, Pennsylvania, which is just a little bit outside of Philadelphia. The Negro, with the trumpet at his lips, his dark moons of weariness beneath his eyes, where the smoldering memory of slave ships blazed to the crack of whips about his thighs. The music from the trumpet at his lips is honey mixed with fire. The rhythm from the trumpet at his lips is ecstasy, distilled from old desire. Now, I think that poem pretty much speaks for itself, but quite frankly, it also reminds me of the reason that we all love jazz and what it has brought for all of us to be together today. Jazz is fiery. It's spontaneous, riveting music that speaks to our souls. We must do all that we can to sustain, nourish, preserve, and promote the unique history and the unique tradition of jazz in America. Let me say it one more time. Jazz is alive and will never die because we won't let it. Thank you.